in the right coast.
Yeah, we are somewhat. Winter's hanging on. Yesterday it got cold again.
Good morning, everyone. All right. So, let's see. All right. So today we're going to continue with instructions, which is a chapter of the Red Book. It's like chapter 10, I think. Or no, chapter, yeah, it is chapter 10. So we're reading instruction, and today we're going to be talking about acknowledging one's yearning. But before I begin that, there's a footnote, and we're on page 187 of the Reader's Edition of the Red Book. I have it before me. And there's a footnote 190 that begins, that's actually before the beginning of this passage. So I'm going to read the footnote first. Footnote. The corrected draft has guiding reflection. In the draft and corrected draft, a lengthy passage occurs. What follows here is a paraphrase. I wonder whether this is real, an underworld, or the other reality, and whether it was the other reality that had forced me here. I see here that Salome, my pleasure, moves to the left, the side of the impure and bad. This movement follows the serpent, which represents the resistance and the enmity against this movement. Pleasure goes away from the door. Forethinking, the idea, throughout this passage stands at the door, knowing the entrance to the mysteries. Therefore, desire melts into the many. If forethinking does not direct it and force it toward its goal. If one meets a man who only desires, one will find resistance against his desire behind it. Desire without forethinking gains much, but keeps nothing. Therefore, his desire is the source of constant disappointment. Thus, Elijah calls Salome back. If pleasure is united with forethinking, the serpent lies before them. To succeed in something, you first need to deal with the resistance and difficulty. Otherwise, joy leaves behind pain and disappointment. Therefore, I drew nearer. I had first to overcome the difficulty and the resistance to gain what I desired. When desire overcomes the difficulty, it becomes seeing and follows forethinking. Therefore, I see that Salome's hands are pure, with no trace of crime. My desire is pure if I first overcome the difficulty and resistance. If I weigh up pleasure and forethinking, I am like a fool, blindly following his longing. If I follow my thinking, I forsake my pleasure. The ancients said in images that the fool finds the right way. Forethinking has the first word, therefore. Elijah asked me what I wanted. You should always ask yourself what you desire, since all too many do not know what they want. I did not know what I wanted. You should confess your longing and what you long for on yourself. Thus you satisfy your pleasure and nourish your forethinking at the same time. From the corrected draft, pages 103 and 104. There's certainly plenty to talk about in that footnote. Do you want to comment on it, Jordan?
Yeah, especially the ancients said, I can read this two ways. The ancients said said in images that the fool finds the right way, as if they're telling the story in images that the fool will find the right way. And then you could also read it, the ancients said in images the fool finds the right way, or the ancients said in images the fool finds the right way. And just subtle changes times three. And what's interesting is that a good thing? The fool finds the way, or in images the fool is finding something, or they're telling the fool finding the right way story in images. And so the inflection, I kind of feel here that the to the left, the bad, the night, the unconscious, that piece he's moving, that the ancients were basically telling visual stories that the fool finds the right way. And I think in that he's trying to unite pleasure and forethinking. He's trying to unite eros and logos. He's trying to unite instinct, intuition, and thinking and sensation. And it feels like he's really playing a two-part, put the four functions, intuition, feeling, thinking, sensation, together as one. Otherwise, that neither leads to anything but disappointment.
Right. And he's also creating as a pair of opposites forethinking and pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was thinking about rules, his discussion of rules, which I might pull out later, but he begins his discussion of rules by saying, I do my best to follow no rule. Okay. Mm-hmm. And what that means is he follows his pleasure and intuition as much as possible, but, recognizes that sometimes rules and forethinking do take precedence. And
I think that's a beautiful point, because the way I've always said that is reasons are usually always unreasonable.
Yeah.
Because if you start with the reasons, it's not starting with the problem or the situation. It's starting with an expectation that may be flawed based on the context of what you're looking at, where you need the other pieces to inform it.
Yeah, just a minute. I'm just looking to see if I can quickly find that passage. I suspect I can. Maybe not. Nope, not there. Okay. Well, I'll leave that aside for the moment, but one other chance.
I think also when he says you should confess your longing and what you long for to yourself, well, that's also a way to make sure you're not being ruled by your complexes, and that the complexes become just functionally interdependent allies, and in a best case, or at least constituents, but not necessarily the unconscious drivers. So that when you're longing, when something's trying to hijack your mouth, so to speak.
Yeah. And one other point I wanted to make at this point is that here he's saying he's wondering whether this is real. Okay. And the significance of that, it seems to me, is that at this point in the Red Book period, and we're talking about late 1913 and early 1914, before the beginning of the First World War, Jung really did not know what was going on in his head, whether he was, in fact, losing it and losing his, I guess, humanity, and in a sense. And so here he's struggling with this issue of, whether what he's seeing is real or whether his psyche is just going off into outer space. And he doesn't know how. I'm sorry, I can't find that passage just off the top of my head, so I'll have to look again. But anyway, Jung is here still struggling, and quite seriously struggling with what the heck he's doing.
Well, and I think too, yeah, I think that's a great point, because I think what's interesting here is you're starting to deal with that place where he's in, locked psych ward kind of places on the
Yeah.
basically front lines, except that his intellect is having to step aside to realize that he's having these same intense stirrings, but that he's self-aware with boundaries and, glass wall compartments. I don't think he put anything in like apothecary drawers, so to
Right.
speak, in his head. But the footnote 188, he says, only then I learned a psychological objectivity. Only then could I say to a patient, be quiet, something is happening. There are such things as mice in a house. You cannot say you are wrong when you have a thought. For the understanding of the unconscious, we must see our thoughts as events, as phenomena. So here he's starting, the unconscious is real. And he's starting to, I think, see the sunlight, sunbeams through the trees.
Yeah.
The trees being all of these patients who are basically psychologically incarcerated.
Right.
But he's starting to understand that, it's just like that water will fill to its cup, and
Right.
so he's expanding now to this larger horizon of the psyche, whereas Freud is hanging out in his racist ivory tower intellectually, and still, lie down and tell me about your mother. It's like, no, thank you, Sigmund. I don't want to talk about your problems. It's like,
Yeah.
I'd rather talk about mine. So, I'm not that fixated on her. So it's like, it's interesting that he was seeing the whole and all the parts, whereas I think Freud was still in the fit, finish, and polish. I have to sound good. I have a reputation to protect.
Yeah.
And Jung's out there in the trenches,
Yeah.
and
Freud's keeping up his appearances. He's always in a suit, coat, and tie, and has everything perfect, and Jung's sitting out on a log contemplating the sea, or the lake in front of Zurich.
And then every Wednesday parking his red car in front of a certain house. So it's like,
right. Okay, moving right along. Okay, so anyway, we made the point that Jung, at this stage of the Red Book period, is still trying to decide whether the psyche is real, whether what he's seeing in his mind is real, and surely it is. But it's only surely after we read the collected works that we have got it finally. Oh yeah.
yeah. Real. And I think too, here he's starting to realize that these people with the intense psychiatric, I don't know what word I don't want to say issues even here, because he's starting to see these people with intense, say, psychological activity. Let me just put it that way. Right. That see them as people too, instead of things to be, fixed or diagnosed. He's seeing multiple states of the human psyche, multiple, symbols of the soul, as it were, and how they present.
Yeah, although the Oedipus complex does come up in all of us, and the electric complex for women, it doesn't mean you're crazy, and but it might mean that you need some conversation with somebody who's smarter than you are for a while.
Well, and the Oedipal complex too isn't, a strange fixation with, mother or father. It's the journey to leave the nest and not return, as Oedipus did, to a way where, your mother and father are unfamiliar alien tricksters to you, and you reconnect and rejoin and live in the basement of the household kind of thing. This is the go out and become who you are rather than, fantasize and don't leave the nest.
Right. Okay, so we are on page 187 of the Red Book. We've read this footnote that precedes it, and now we're going to read the text itself. We're starting in the paragraph that begins right at the bottom, the last two lines. It is no small matter to acknowledge one's yearning. For this, many need to make a particular effort at honesty. All too many do not want to know where their yearning is because it would seem to them impossible or too distressing. And yet yearning is the way of life. If you do not acknowledge your yearning, then you do not follow yourself, but go on foreign ways that others have indicated to you. So you do not live your life, but an alien one. But who should live your life if you do not live it? It is not only stupid to exchange your own life for an alien one, but also a hypocritical game, because you can never really live the life of others. You can only pretend to do it, deceiving the other and yourself, since you can only live your own life. Okay, go, Jordan. What do you want to say?
Well, I think I love the quote here of find, follow, pursue, enhance, discover, reinforce, and strengthen your dreams, or someone else will pay you to do the same for theirs.
Right. Right. So the point is, it's best to understand what your pleasure is, what you want in your own life, and then evaluate how you can do it. Because if you can't do that, then somebody else is going to tell you what to do. And, that can be a boss in your job, or it can be a pastor or a priest, or a mullah. Somebody else is telling you what to do instead of you telling yourself what you want to do. And, of course, there are, unspoken rules in life, but that's why we make mistakes. We make mistakes to learn what can't be done. And
yes, and if you're not making mistakes, you're actually not doing anything.
Right. And so, in job interviews, when I was hiring people over many years, I would always ask them, what's the biggest mistake you ever made? And typically people go, oh my God, I have to talk about a mistake.
Yeah.
But from my perspective,
like you're going to fire them before you even hire them.
That's right. But from my perspective, if they tell me a small mistake, then I know they're lying, and they'll probably lie to me. If they do tell me a big mistake, then I know that they will learn from their mistakes and proceed. And I always told employees, if you're not making at least one mistake every day, you're not trying hard enough. And the point is that successful businesses achieve when everybody is out there doing the best they can, not following my rules or what I say, but what they see is the best thing that could be done in that moment. Sometimes they make mistakes, that those have to be forgiven and you have to move on. So Jordan, would you, I'm going to mute and hide for a minute, but I'll be here listening if you would read the next paragraph.
Certainly. If you give up yourself, you live it in others. Thereby, you become selfish to others, and thus you deceive others. Everyone thus believes that such a life is possible. It is, however, only apish imitation. Though giving in to your apish appetite, you infect others because the ape stimulates the apish. So you turn yourself and others into apes. Through reciprocal imitation, you live according to the average expectation. The image of the hero was set up for all and every age through the appetite for imitation. Therefore, the hero was murdered, since we all have been aping him. Do you know why you cannot abandon apishness? For fear of loneliness and defeat.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Pretty profound. So
Let me
if
read the next paragraph before
go
your
ahead.
comment, because I think it helps with it.
Yeah.
To live oneself means to be one's own task. Never say that it is a pleasure to live oneself. It will be no joy, but a long suffering, since you must become your own creator. If you want to create yourself, then you do not begin with the best and the highest, but with the worst and the deepest. Therefore, say that you are reluctant to live yourself. The flowing together of the stream of life is not joy, but pain, since it is power against power, guilt and shatters the sanctified. That reminds me of your "What's your biggest mistake?" question, and Churchill's interview. When he, for his cabinet, when he asks one gentleman, he says, "So, tell me about your vices." And he gets
Tell me about your what? I'm sorry.
Your vices.
Oh, okay.
And he's not trying to get to an accusation. He's looking to, do I need to stock the liquor cabinet? Do I need to close the blinds at 3:00 because they're prostitutes? I mean, he's looking for damage control before anything happens. So he wants to know how to orchestrate ops. And that's all his question is about. He's not judging. But the guy says, "Well, sir, I have no vices. I'm an upstanding gentleman." And he just guffaws and chortles and laughs. And he goes, either you're lying or you're just that boring. And I can have neither of those two on my cabinet. Or I can have neither of those two on my cabinet, which reminds me of your, tell me about your biggest mistake.
Yep, absolutely. And I have some whoppers in my life, but fortunately I had a good enough education so I could survive them.
Well, it's funny when you every time you say that question, I always go through my mistake Rolodex and go, well, what's the tenor of this conversation? How do I want to set this off? I mean, almost dying on a mountain, there's betrayal, there's this. Where do I start? Which one do I? So I think what's interesting is there's the people who don't want to talk about their mistakes. And then there's those of us, you and I, and it's, well, I want to be on topic. So which mistake am I going to choose for this company? It's like,
Yeah. And I'm going to, I have a comment here, but I don't dare put it in on the record in video. It would insult some of my friends, but if you, the basic point is, are you living your life or are you living somebody else's life?
Right.
If you, there's a favorite comment of mine. The boss is always an asshole. Well, he is. Typically,
it's more so when you're
most
self-employed.
often it's a he. Pardon.
More so when you're self-employed. I mean, I make myself
Right.
go to work every day.
Right. Exactly. And part of that is, he's asking you to do things you don't want to do, and that's hard. Okay, and it's very people rebel against it. And so as I see in my classroom, I'm teaching art until the end of the year, which is boy, is that ever an oxymoron? But anyway, assigned to teach art for the rest of the year. And first of all, as these classes are coming down the hallway to my art room, and I get, I don't know, 15 classes a week at least, some of the boys rebel against going in because they don't want to even go in my classroom because they know I'm going to require them to do something.
Right.
And I'm actually manifesting Father's world, my responsibility to teach them something that maybe they don't want to learn.
And this is presumptuous, but it sounds like, because I hear the oxymoron of teaching art, but it seems like from my perspective of you, I gather that if I was sitting there in the corner of the room, fly on a wall, I think the verb probably would be teaching them how to live art or live as art, so that it's no right and wrong. It's come in here and find yourself.
Right. And so in the coming week, I'm going to teach the mandala, which is exactly that, of course.
Right.
We'll see how that goes. What could possibly go wrong, right?
Go wrong, yes.
But we have some issues coming up in our young people because particularly in the third and fourth graders, they're just wild. They're out of control. They were cooped up in their homes for 2 years because of COVID, and they're behaving like wild animals, and it's hard to get them to pay attention. And God bless the teachers that are teaching those two classes, the third and fourth graders, this year, because it's just really difficult to get them to stop and pay attention to you.
Well, in that age too, where you have to be careful so they don't become real, because the panther, where the life goes out of them, because now they're cooped up in the closet of a classroom, and they really want to go ape, as Jung's talking, the apish here, which is natural, except that it's time also for consciousness to enter the play. Right. So whether the play is theatrical or the play being play in the sandbox, and they have right. both there, which it's wonderfully wild. And it's also, as as an instructor, you're was that orchestrated chaos, it's like herding cats.
Right. Well, and the teachers, the classroom teachers, have these kids, they have the thumb screws twisted down pretty tight. And so the result is they have their classroom under control. But when they bring them to me, the kids seem to think that that's their time to blow off steam. And holy smokes, I have a mural on the end of my classroom, and a quarter of it was destroyed by my last class of last week. They literally ripped it down, and they did it unconsciously, but nonetheless they did it. And so we'll see how that's going to work in coming weeks. I'm trying to be a father figure, but in my last class of yesterday, I had third graders, and they were just out of control entirely. I ended up with 5 different other adults in my classroom at one point or another during that 1 hour, including an assistant principal. And it was pretty hard to get that classroom to pay attention and clean up. Finally we did, but oh my God, they just ripped down part of the decor of the classroom. And so we need to, that's going to be a work in progress, that particular class. Going forward, I only will see them once a week, but it's, and I really don't know what these other teachers think of what I'm doing in that classroom because I tolerate it. Okay. In other words, when there's chaos in my classroom, I let the chaos go forth.
Mhm.
Because for me, I mean, compared to being in combat, it's pretty romper room, actually.
Well, and
It is.
I think that's a wonderful methodology because, for example, I've been thinking about your situation when I'm out on the plaza and if no one's sitting down, in terms of how I even work with my clients. And it's interesting because there's the art is messy, life is messy, except instead of getting triggered and having a tantrum because you're rebelling against, fighting against, warring against the fact that you're being messy, you don't need to apologize for the messy. Like you said, let the messy run. Relative to combat, it's completely different. But what's interesting is the ability to deal with art and life that's messy. Instead of responding with violence, you respond with process. And okay, now that the storm has passed, what message did that bring? What's the treasure in that trouble?
Yeah.
So that, it rises and falls, and you're like, okay, well, let's pull the gold out of the pan. What did you get from that? And it gives them accountability to respond. And you also might just give you a big blank set of stares, but at the same time, it counterpoints the chaos.
Yeah. Susan says, my grief recovery work is with third and fourth graders. It is like herding cats. Yeah, say that. Well, in fairness, sometimes that you reach a point. I was working with oil pastels last week, which meant that for every hour of teaching, I had to spend an hour cleaning up the floor with Lysol wipes to prevent it from becoming a layer of the floor covering, right? And so I had been telling the kids to, be careful about these things. But about halfway through that class, I go back in this one corner that was nearest my desk, and there's a space about 3 feet wide and 5 feet long that is layered with black oil pastel, okay, about a 1/4 inch thick. And I just lost it. And I said, class over, we're going to start cleaning up now. This has got to be clean before you can leave this classroom. And, to their credit, the last 20-25 minutes, most of the kids did kick in and work on cleaning up the mess that they'd created. But it was still loud enough and chaotic enough that it still attracted 5 other adults who were either in the next classroom or had an office nearby or whatever. And so I had 5 other adults in my classroom in addition to 18 mostly out of control children until the last 20 to 25 minutes. But, I consider when they come into my classroom, I consider it Father's world. Welcome to Father's world. And Father will sometimes blow up. He can tolerate a lot, but not that, not destroying the classroom. And, there had been, not only had the stuff been spread around, but the mural had been destroyed, and I was not pleased. Anyway, go ahead, or I'm going to read now.
Just real quick comment though. It's in that dad or father world. One thing about parenting is, it's about boundaries and their safety. But there's a point where they sneak out and hop the fence. Well, at that point, it happens enough times. So you have to move the fences out a little more. And finally, after a while, they have to create their own boundaries and fences. But what you're doing is you're allowing them to transcend or transgress the bounds to actually find their boundaries instead of never even approaching them.
Right. Well, and I was reading Mary Stein's book again this morning, Men Under
Men under,
Construction. Yeah, and in the end of that book, he talks about the archetypal things that a father does, and one of those is to be a provider. And so when they come into my classroom, I'm providing them with everything that they need to do the art. To be a protector, in other words, in my classroom, I let them get a little wild, and it doesn't bother me. But I can imagine some young woman just graduating with an art degree from some college, going into one of those classrooms, and leaving with her hair on fire.
or him, at that age has that person, invoked the rites of initiation for their own passage into adulthood. The child becomes the parent of the adult.
Right. So
you're allowing nature to occur.
Right.
And
so I'm their protector. But I'm also the rule giver. And so that's one of the other archetypal things that fathers do is they give rules. And there's one other thing that just skips my mind right now, but
well, you're creating a gas tank for them. Gas is, so you put it in a tank, connect it to an ignition, and go vroom vroom. Then it's pretty fun, But you're not allowing the gas just to poison everything by just formlessly flowing around. You're putting it in a spot, and the father space or the dad space it's a gas tank for their volatility,
right?
And that way the volatility can inspire them, can move them literally.
Well, and the fourth thing is to be the creator, to show them how to create, to be a creator.
Put that gas somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the provider to provide all the stuff, the protector, the rule giver, and the creator. And so it's actually ideal for a male art teacher to, if you understand that your role is to be a father figure, and a lot of these kids don't have fathers in the household, and this is why the young men rebel about they see me in the classroom as they're coming down the hall, and they say, "Oh, I don't want to go in here."
Well, and it feels like you're systematically trying to harness them all as coal or wood shovelers into the steam locomotive to pull the whole train of the community along, instead of just being willy-nilly, blowing off steam, always derailed, always sidetracked, to stay with the metaphor. I mean,
right. So anyway, so I have to remind myself about that before every class. Otherwise, I get off track, because I have 18 to 30 kids in the classroom, and there's more of them than there are of me. But anyway, okay, going on. The image of the mother of God with the child that I foresee indicates to me the mystery of the transformation. If forethinking and pleasure unite in me, a third arises from them, the divine Son, who is the supreme meaning, the symbol, the passing over into a new creation. I do not myself become the supreme meaning or the symbol, but the symbol becomes in me such that it has its substance, and I mine. Thus I stand like Peter in worship before the miracle of the transformation and the beginning and the becoming real of the God in me. Although I am not the Son of God myself, I represent him nevertheless as one who was a mother to the God, and one therefore to whom, in the name of the God, of the freedom of the binding and loosing has been given. The binding and loosing take place in me, But insofar as it takes place in me, I am a part of the world. It also takes place through me in the world, and no one can hinder it. It doesn't take place according to the way of my will, but in the way of unavoidable effect. I am not master over you, but the being of the God in me. I lock the past with one key, with the other I open the future. This takes place through my transformation. The miracle of transformation commands. I am its servant, just as the Pope is. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a footnote here, 193. Whatsoever ye shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And I think that really directly applies to our previous employed, self-employed conversation, where, if the eternal salvation of the misnomer of, oh, if I can only make it to death, it'll all be okay, which means people are holding their breath their whole life. It's like, no. You have to do that now. And that will never come, and that will not change you, and in a sense will just embolden how indelible whatever you did is.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, well, he's speaking to me here, but I'm not going to go into it further. You sort of referred what I have to say about it.
On the same page.
Yeah, you see how incredible it was to believe such of oneself. It applies not to me, but to the symbol. The symbol becomes my Lord and unfailing commander. I will fortify its reign and change itself into a fixed and riddling image, whose meaning turns completely inward and whose pleasure radiates outward like blazing fire. A Buddha in the flames, because I sink into my symbol to such an extent, the symbol changes me from my one into my other. And that cruel goddess of my interior, my womanly pleasure, my own other, the tormented tormentor, that which is to be tormented. I have interpreted these images as best I can with poor words. Okay. Anything
So much there.
there?
Well, the my womanly pleasure piece, it feels to be a early 20th century societal kind of thing. I mean, they would put women away for fevers, or and all they're doing is it's menstruation. And so I think there's a little bit of a sexist bent from a modern view, but then from his view, he's simply describing these different parts in the psyche. So I think we have to look at it from where he was and what the society, how the society then used words.
Yeah.
Because I think here it would look, oh, that's so discriminatory. Well, that's not his intent. He's trying to look at creative drive, authoritative drive, masculine, feminine. And I mean, the tormented tormentor. But that's the tormented tormentor. It reminds me of, when you're growing up, you don't realize it till you're older, but when you're growing up, you had the beautiful opportunity to watch your parents still growing up. And, it's the tormented tormentor, where even the one moving you is not perfect.
Right. Okay.
Again, poor words.
I mean, it is all poor words. Let me read the footnote after Buddha in the flames. The corrected draft continues. Where the idea is, pleasure always is too. If the idea is inside, pleasure is outside. Therefore, an air of evil pleasure envelops me. A lecherous and bloodthirsty Godhead gives me this false air. This happens because I must altogether suffer the becoming of the God, and can therefore not separate it from myself at first. But as long as it is not separated from me, I am so seized by the idea that I am it, and therefore I am also the woman associated with the idea from the beginning, in that I receive the idea and represent it in the manner of Buddha. My pleasure is like the Indian Kali, since she is Buddha's other side. Kali, however, is Salome, and Salome is my soul.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
There's such ownership in that paragraph of that foot.
Okay, we're going into another section that was separated by a double line, and there's a pre-footnote here. So I'll read the pre-footnote first. We'll discuss that, and then Jordan, you can read the actual text. But reading footnote 197. In the draft, a lengthy passage occurs here, a paraphrase of which follows. The numbness is like a death. I needed total transformation. Through this, my meaning, like that of the Buddha, went completely inside. Then the transformation happened. I then went over to pleasure, as I was a thinker. As a thinker, I rejected my feeling, but I had rejected part of life. Then my feeling became a poisonous plant, and when it awakened, it was sensuality instead of pleasure, the lowest and the commonest form of pleasure. This is represented by Kali. Salome is the image of his pleasure that suffers pain since it was shut out for too long. It then became apparent that Salome, i.e., my pleasure, was my soul. When I recognized this, my thinking changed and ascended to the idea, and then the image of Elijah appeared. This prepared me for the mystery play and showed me in advance the way of transformation that I had to undergo in the mysterium. The flowing together of the forethinking with the pleasure produces the God. I recognized that the God in me wanted to become a man, and I considered this and honored this, and I became the servant of the God, but for no one other than myself. Corrected draft, it would be madness and presumption to assume that I also did this for others. I sank into the contemplation of the wonder of transformation and first turned into the lower level of my pleasure, and then through this I recognized my soul. The smiles of Elijah and Salome indicate that they were happy at my appearance, but I was in deep darkness. When the way is dark, so is the idea that gives light. When the idea in the moment of confusion allows the words and not the blind longing, then the words lead you to difficulty. Whereas it leads you to the right, that is why Elijah turns left to the side of the unholy and evil, and Salome turns right to the side of correct and good. She doesn't go to the garden, the place of pleasure, but remains in the house of the Father. Okay, any comments there?
Yeah, that's a powerful paragraph where Salome, the soul, the creative drive, is what lives you forward, whereas Elijah turning back is standing on the foundations of ancestors, the foundation cornerstone that the creative drive, Salome, braces against to push forward or move forward. And what's so, I think, important about this paragraph, again, his psychological ownership of all the parts, and the left side, the evil, the previous, the past, the unconscious, the unknown. Well, the right has no more known and no less evil, but it's moving through a process of kind of gold panning, the treasure out of the trouble of Salome moving forward, of the soul actuating, I think, in this footnote.
Yeah.
I mean, thoughts from your perspective?
No, I was thinking about something else. So I'm sorry, I wasn't carefully listening. Michelle says, remind me who or what is voice in that passage. Sophia? And the answer is the soul, which is Salome, is the
Salome.
voice that he's talking about. It. I mean, her voice isn't really here. But
And the voice in there is Jung as a Sophia character, except he also says that Elijah is his soul and he is his soul, or I mean, Salome is his soul, and in that, then his soul is him, and so he's equating himself with Salome, but I think the voice of Sophia would be the both and of the whole environment, the world of Elijah, Salome, and Jung there.
Right. Sophia is wisdom. Okay.
Right.
And that's one thing that we need to remember. The Bible, many modern versions have written Sophia out by calling it wisdom. But if you look at Proverbs 8, 11 through 32, you immediately see where wisdom is mentioned. In some Bibles, the word is Sophia. And so wisdom has to take part in both things. It has to take the forethinking of Elijah and the pleasure principle of Salome and meld them together. That's what the transformation is. That's what we're talking about.
And I'm glad Sophia was brought up too, because there's a wonderful book called The Alphabet versus the Goddess. And it goes through the etymology of the word Sophia and wisdom, etymology being that path of which how the word evolved. And as we had that presentation several years ago, I can't remember the iconographer's name, the journalist iconographer, but she mentioned that, the divine feminine started out as Chokmah, Chokhmah.
Yeah.
And that's a Hebrew word that's a very high-powered feminine noun. And then as it moved north to Greece, Rome, it's translated from Chokmah to Sophia, still a capital S, still a high-powered feminine noun. And then that's when the trouble started, because as it continued moving north, lowercase p, pneuma, P-N-E-U-M-A, that's a neutral noun. So here's the writing on the wall of the sacred feminine literally being lost in translation, because next it's translated to logos, capital L-O-G-O-S. That's a high-powered masculine noun. Yeah. And then the nail in the coffin of the alphabet and the goddess is it becomes capital S, Spiritus Sanctus, which is an even higher powered masculine noun. So every time you see wisdom, if you say Chokmah or Sophia, I think you get a lot better representation of that divine feminine within the messaging, rather than, oh, look at all these guys running around, Logos and Spiritus Sanctus. Reminds me of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. That's not three dudes. That's not Casper the ghost. That's Sophia. That's the anima. That's the faceless female. Because what kind of generative power are you going to get from a Trinity that is just three males? Right. So the Holy Ghost is a feminine principle.
Right. And so Susan says, I loved the and this is a book name, I believe, Alphabet versus the Goddess. She says highly recommended. I've not read that book, but I do want to share my screen here for a moment. This is the water.
Oh, your video froze.
That's pouring the water represents, the water bearer is a reference to the Aquarian age, and the person pouring the water represents Sophia. Mm-hmm. The water is the water of life, which represents wisdom, And the figure below that's receiving the water, the wisdom into the bowl, it represents all human beings. We're now receiving the water, the wisdom, the water of life and wisdom into us. We're in the beginning of the Aquarian age, and so
Could you actually put that back up?
put what back up?
The water bearer image.
Yeah, okay. I just deleted it, but I'll put it back up. Yeah, go ahead.
And I think to unpack your messaging there a bit, astrologically, Aquarius is a big air sign. And so the question will be, well, where's this water coming from? And what happens is the air is the breath of life. But then what happens is there's the magic of Aquarius that pulls the invisible, unseen, unknown condensation water out of the air to bring it together as the water of life to nourish. So I think that's one of the things that's so poignant about this image, is just astrologically how the personality of Aquarius as an air sign pulls the water out of its own breath, out of its own air, the breath of life becoming the water of life. So I think that transformation and that sequence is such a wonderful two-part alchemy between the breath of life and the water of life that's then continually poured here out to humanity. Really makes this sculpture even more poignant, just from the tell me about Aquarius. It's an air sign. Where does this water come from? It comes from the unseen, that the magic of knowing what is there that is so small, like the Atman, that you can't see, and what's so large that you can't see. So as a thought there to reinforce this.
I'm going to reinforce that in a moment. But Robert says, I think we missed Skip's intro to the image. So I'm going to explain the image here just briefly. Last year, I wanted to honor Colleen Kibert, who is the wisdom of a small group of us who did our confluence in Helena, Montana last summer. And I helped arrange a commission of sculptor Tim Holmes to create an award, something like an Oscar type award, a lifetime award for Colleen Kibert primarily. And so this is the maquette that Tim produced for that award. It ultimately was turned into bronze, and now 7 of us have received this award. And we hope others will be, but we are going to be having our confluence again this fall at Watsonville, California, at the Mount Madonna Retreat Center on 13th to the 16th of October of this year. And we hope that you'll all come. And I will put the website information up right now in the YouTube channel. It is the website is still somewhat under construction, but you can see most of the information. And we still have to get costs and that sort of thing put together. But if you look at Confluence 23, which is our second of these, Colleen is actually the host. The first Confluence was hosted by Tim in Helena, Montana. The second Confluence is to be hosted by Colleen. And so you have now seen you have access to the basics of our information. And the other thing I wanted to show you is what I think sort of leads to all the wisdom we're talking about, including the air sign and everything else we've been talking about. This is what the Aquarian age means. Okay. So that pale blue dot there is us, everything that ever existed on the earth from time immemorial to today is contained in that pale blue dot. And once we, as human beings, start to appreciate the wisdom of what we have to do in the future, we'll get the meaning of this image. But this image was taken from Voyager 1, I believe, and it was taken by a lone astronomer, woman astronomer, who was the mission control overnight for Voyager 1 many years ago, 40 years ago or so. And since she was in charge, she issued the instruction for Voyager to turn around and take this selfie. And that's the wisdom that we have to get. Okay, so figure that one out. Where are we, Jordan?
Actually, right before we read, I'd like to, besides Carl Sagan, who made it famous, Candy Hansen is the astronomer from NASA who made that, I believe, happen with her calculations. In addition, a woman from the University of Arizona, that they worked together. So just to give credit where credit is due, Candy Hansen is the name of that woman.
Thank you for that.
So we're at the pre-footnote 197 you just read, where we start in the moment of your bewilderment. Shall I read forward?
You go ahead, yes.
In the moment of your bewilderment, follow your forethinking and not your blind desire, since forethinking leads you to the difficulties that should always come first. They come, nevertheless. If you look for a light, you fall first into an even darker darkness. In this darkness, you will find a light with a weak reddish flame that gives only a low brightness, but it is enough for you to see your neighbor. It is exhausting to reach this goal that seems to be no goal, and so it is good. I am paralyzed and therefore ready to accept. My forethinking rests on the lion, my power. And this footnote 198 there, a passage occurs, a phrase of which follows, if I am strong, so also are my intentions and presuppositions. My own thought weakens and goes over into the idea. The idea becomes strong. It is supported by its own strength. I recognize this in the fact that Elijah is supported by the lions. The lion is of stone. My pleasure is dead and turned to stone, because I did not love Salome, his soul. This gave my thought the coldness of stone, and from this the idea took its solidity, which it needed to subjugate my thought. It needed to be subjugated as it strove against Salome, since she appeared bad to it.
Okay. I held to the sanctified form and didn't want to allow the chaos to break through its dams. I believed in the order of the world and hated everything disorganized and unformed. Therefore, above all, I have to realize that my own law had brought me to this place. As the God developed in me, I thought he was a part of myself. I thought that my I included him, and therefore I took him for my thought. But I also considered that my thoughts were parts of my I. Thus, I entered into my thoughts and into the thinking about the God, in that I took him for a part of myself. On account of my thoughts, I had left myself. Therefore, myself became hungry and made God into a selfish thought. If I leave myself, my hunger will drive me to find myself in my object, that is, in my thought. Therefore, you love reasonable and orderly thoughts, since you could not endure it if yourself was in disordered, that is, unsuitable thoughts. Through your selfish wish, you pushed out of your thoughts everything that you do not consider ordered, that is, unfitting. You create order according to what you know. You do not know the thoughts of chaos, and yet they exist. My thoughts are not myself, and my I does not embrace the thought. Your thought has this meaning and that, not just one, but many meanings. No one knows how many.
Yeah, that really reminds me of thoughts and emotions being weather, WEATHER, like clouds and storms, weather washing through, that aren't really necessarily the feeling and thinking functions. So that one concept I utilize a lot with clients is don't let your emotions dictate how you feel. And that's kind of you in the classroom with not letting the chaos storm over your castle, so to speak. And my thought then is, when you get a lot of emotions, anxiety, or however they present, washing through, literally raise your shoulders and lean back into your feeling function until they go through, and then say, what do I feel about that? And sometimes it's, I feel the clouds wash through. Look, it's a sunny sky again. But what happens is I think he's making a distinction of my thoughts are not myself, which he goes into in the next paragraph. And even in this one, my thoughts are not myself. And my I does not embrace the thought. So in that sense, he's allowing the thinking to occur, but his capital T thinking function is the observer, not the thinking itself. And so he's making a distinction, I think, to not get tar babied or wrapped up into his own briar patch of thinking and emotions, and understand that feeling and capital T thinking functions can decide. You can utilize those to actually then have wits. And, what someone says, what was your biggest mistake? Well, instead of, oh crap, oh my God, I'm all wiggy. It's like, oh, well, that was, and you say what it was. So there's a thinking and feeling function instead of reactionary. He's saying here how responsive you can be when you understand the different levels of these things.
Right. Okay. So reading on here, my thoughts are not myself, but exactly like the things of the world, alive and dead. Just as I am not damaged through living in a partly chaotic world, so too I am not damaged if I live in my partly chaotic thought world. Thoughts are natural events that you do not possess and whose meaning you only imperfectly recognize. Thoughts grow in me like a forest, populated by many different animals, but man is domineering in his thinking, and therefore he kills the pleasure of the forest and that of the wild animals. Man is violent in his desire, and he himself becomes a forest and a forest animal. Just as I have freedom in the world, I also have freedom in my thoughts. Freedom is conditional. And 2 footnotes. In 1921, Jung wrote, the peculiar reality of unconscious contents, therefore, gives us the same right to describe them as objects, as outer things. The draft and corrected draft have and this was crossed out, I would have to consider myself mad. Okay, that was crossed out. And he says, it would be more than inconsistent if I thought that I had produced the thoughts of my mysterium.
Mhm.
Okay.
And both of those really go into the unconscious contents, the psychic phenomenon being real things.
Right. Okay. And so in terms of Elijah being a prophet, I want to point out that prophecy has always come from history. Okay. In other words, prophets say what they say based on what history tells us. And you know, often, and it's certainly true in the United States today, that we've had a degree of chaos. We still are living through a degree of chaos. And you know, one occasion, I was in the presence of someone who was railing against the patriarchy and how certain things were happening that were patriarchal, and you know, why don't they understand, and why are these people in a certain way? And I had to say, no, wait a minute, those are the men who kept me alive in Vietnam, and they're not, you know, they're part of us. They're, you know, all of it, you know, everything that we see in our society today is part of us. And you know, you can pretend that what we're seeing in our current events is not part of us, but it is. And so what has to come out of chaos and pleasure, the pleasurable thought that one can take over the government and make things perfect just for everybody, when you know that's clearly not the case. And it will, you know, we have to have a little forethinking and know that, you know, eventually the logos will catch up with where the Eros was too strong in some of our fellow Americans for a period of time. But, you know, we can predict exactly what is going to happen in next year's election and in the coming months. It's just too easy. All we have to do is examine ourselves, and we know that what the answer is. Jordan?
Well, I think that your expression there really speaks to the foresight that Jung brought up here to begin with. And if I look at foresight, which is also seeing the bigger picture of what something is instead of what it's proposed to be, what it's presented as, what it's sensationalized as. If I look at the $130,000 hush money for pleasure that was put forward by the prominent, you know, former president, well, here we are 7 years later talking about it. So my foresight would be, oh, look, and hush money, that's another failed business deal.
Yeah, right.
It didn't work. So I mean, and the thing is, people trying to derive substance from sensationalism is ludicrous.
Yeah, and you know, the United States as an entity, we the people, have a strange way of becoming what we are today, and we always have had. And you know, the point here is, when we say freedom, Jung's point here at the end of this paragraph is profound, which is freedom is conditioned. Okay, if one person has all the freedom and nobody else has the freedom, then that can't work. Freedom is conditioned, and freedom is conditioned by forethought. Freedom is conditioned by the pleasure principle, what we think we want, and we can take any pleasure that is possible in our lives, whatever that may be, and we can use forethought to consider exactly what the result will be. And we've seen that time and again. It's some people are slow on the uptake, but the old saying, you can fool all the people some of the time and some of the people all of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time.
Yeah.
And thank you, Abe Lincoln, for that one. Or I don't know if he was the originator of it, but he made it famous.
And that's always the mantra of, here are these three things, you can only pick two. It's like,
yeah. And Michelle says, my father is a Vietnam veteran. He taught me how to run to get into the Army. I was lazy and chubby as a teenager. Well, I didn't run to get into the military. In part, it was my family business, of course, because my father was a naval officer. But my father took me to the docks in Yokosuka, Japan in 1962, in March of 62, and showed me a line of ships going out of Tokyo Bay. And he said, see that, Skip? And I said, yeah, Dad. He says, that's the Marines. They're going to Vietnam. Everybody in the military has either been to Vietnam, is there not now, or is going there. And I said, why, Dad? And he said, because the generals need their medals in order to make rank. And so from that moment, which was long before there were student protests, I knew that the Vietnam War was wrong. But at the same time, I knew that I had to have enough personal experience so that I could also talk about it. And so I went and joined the Marines 5 years later. We weren't officially in Vietnam until March the 7th, 1965. And I joined the Marines on March the 7th, 1967, 2 years later. I went to Vietnam at the risk of my own life to experience for myself why it was wrong. And I surely saw that in living color. But none of it was for the reasons that people were protesting. None of it.
And that speaks for the freedom is conditional piece.
Yeah.
Conditioned and conditional. So
right. So well, there's more to say there, but I think we should read on. Jordan, would you read the next paragraph, please?
Certainly.
We need to get to the bottom of 193. Then there's a new chapter, and we'll stop before the new chapter.
That sounds good. I'll read through to there. To certain things of the world, I must say, you should not be thus, but you should be different. Yet first I look carefully at their nature. Otherwise, I cannot change it. I proceed in the same way with certain thoughts. You change those things of the world that, not being useful in themselves, endanger your welfare. Proceed likewise with your thoughts. Nothing is complete, and much is in dispute. The way of life is transformation, not exclusion. Well-being is a better judge than the law. But as I became aware of the freedom in my thought world, Salome embraced me, and I thus became a prophet, since I had found pleasure in the primordial beginning, in the forest, and in the wild animals. It stands too close to reason for me to set myself on a par with my visions, and for me to take pleasure in seeing. I am in danger of believing that I myself am significant, since I see the significant. This will always drive us crazy, and we transform the vision into foolishness and monkey business, since we cannot desist from imitation. Just as my thinking is the son of forethinking, so is my pleasure the daughter of love, of the innocent and conceiving mother of God. Aside from Christ, Mary gave birth to Salome. Therefore, Christ in the Gospel of the Egyptians says to Salome, "Eat every herb, but do not eat the bitter." And when Salome wanted to know, Christ spoke to her, "If you crush the covering of shame, and when the two become one, the male with the female, neither male nor female." Forethinking is the procreative, love is the receptive. Both are beyond this world. Here are understanding and pleasure. We only respect the other. It would be madness to claim that they are in this world. So much that is riddling and cunning coils around this light. I won the power back again from the depths, and it went before me like a lion. And the 3 footnotes, 201, 2, and 3. And this one?
You want to read them?
Yeah, I sure will. 201, the draft continues, I recognized the father because I was a thinker, and thus I did not know the mother, but saw love in the guise of pleasure and called it pleasure. And therefore, this was Salome to me. Now I learned that Mary is the mother, the innocent and love-receiving, and not pleasure, who bears the seed of evil in her heated and seductive nature. If Salome, evil pleasure is my sister, then I must be a thinking saint, and my intellect has met with a sad fate. I must sacrifice my intellect and confess to you that what I told you about pleasure, namely that it is the principle opposed to forethought, is incomplete and prejudiced. I observed as a thinker from the vantage point of my thinking. Otherwise, I could have recognized that Salome, as Elijah's daughter, is an offspring of thought and not the principle itself, which Mary, the innocent Virgin Mother, now appears. Continuing to footnote 202, the Gospel of the Egyptians is one of the apocryphal Gospels that features a dialogue between Christ and Salome. Christ states that he has come to undo the work of the female, namely lust, birth, and decay. To Salome's question of how long shall death prevail, Christ answered, as long as women beat children.
As long as women bear children.
Oh, that's a better, thank you. As long as women bear children. Here, Jung is referring to the following passage. She said, "Then I have done well in not giving birth." Imagining that it is not permitted to bear children, the Lord answered, "Eat of every herb, but the bitter one eat not." The dialogue continues. When Salome asked when it shall be made known, that the Lord said, when you tread underfoot the covering of shame, when you tread underfoot the covering of shame, and when out of two is made one, and the male with the female, neither male nor female. And then in parentheses, the apocryphal New Testament, Jung cites this logion available to him from the Clement in the Stromatals as an example of the union of opposites in the book, the edition Visions, And as an example of the conjunctio of male and female in quotes on the psychology of the child archetype and mysterium conjunctionis. And then 203, the draft and corrected draft have, but when the mystery play showed me this, I did not understand, but I thought I had produced an incredible thought. And then it struck out, I am mad to believe this, and I believed it. And then continues, therefore I was, and that is struck out. Therefore I was seized by fear and wanted to explain my arbitrary thoughts to Elijah and Salome and thus invalidate them. And then in 204, the draft continues, the image of the cool starry night and of the vast sky opens up my eye to the infinity of the inner world, which I, as a desirous man, feel is still too cold. I cannot pull the stars down to myself, but only watch them. Therefore, my impetuous desire feels that the world is nightly and cold.
Yeah. Okay, that's a lot. And
simple from my perspective, to pull this out into something useful in a day-to-day. Don't believe everything you think. Don't get moved by everything you feel.
yeah, absolutely. And and well, I'll just leave it at that. I mean, it's every time I read this book, it takes me to a deeper level of profundity. Okay, and I've read it many times. We've read it here, of course, and I read it cover to cover once on this YouTube channel. And it does require integration. It requires digesting what it is that this man who lived 100 years ago was seeing and saying. But I'm very clear in my own mind that he was the genius that Edward Edinger referred to and said that he was a genius. And Edward Edinger, who was also a practicing psychiatrist, devoted 40 years of his life to, and while I haven't devoted my life to it, I have devoted a lot of time and effort to it. Yeah, absolutely. The purpose, and I have mine right here too.
Yeah. Yeah, Lawrence Jaffe, the purpose of Jung's whole psychology is to make accessible to us that healing power which resides in our unconscious.
Right. And yep, and here's mine.
That's
I still haven't hung it on my wall because I carry it with me everywhere anyway.
Well, I've been so ambivalent about what color frame, and it shouldn't be that big a decision, but it's funny every time I read the Red Book, there's another deepening. Every time I see a color frame, I'm going, well, olive's great, Chinese vermilion's great, silver with chrome would be fine, black is good, red, pink. Well, actually, pink would go with the matte, but I don't think I want that. Well, so I think that's the only one I've knocked out. White's going to be weird, so that's another one. But I laugh. Mine's still not framed, but I haven't taken it out of the plastic until I find what color. And part of me wonders if I should just buy about 10 frames and switch it out each week.
Well, on the other hand, the frame doesn't really matter. It's the entering into the idea that matters. And
that's a good. I like that comment, because to me, just the fact that the matte is there on a printed deckled edge image with the quote inside it has enough framing, it has enough containment already. So
Mhm.
it's, I just probably should dust it off.
Yeah. Well, I should hang it up, but it's not that I have that many visitors at the house anymore. So anyway, uh, I wish everybody a good week and a good week of trying to digest this. I would say to you at this point, if you don't own a copy of the Reader's Edition, I suggest you get one, because these materials are so profound that it's just impossible to fully digest it unless you can really study it quietly in your own time.
And I would suggest too, as a method of studying this, is to, instead of listening to our talking heads, just the voice of the reading, and pull up the image of Salome and Elijah and Jung, and just gaze into the image, stay with the image while these pieces are being read, and you'll start to see the characters get active in terms of how his paintings are also telling this story. So it would be interesting. I wish I had the software to then just play, like have the image and then have the reading played while the image is up, because I think they're both, the reading itself is plenty deep, but then I think when you couple it with the image, it's such a robust thing that this man did 100 years ago. I mean that.
And this, I was asked to type the quote into the chat, so I'm doing that. And this is a quote from Dr. Lawrence Yaffe.
Mm-hmm.
And Lawrence Yaffe was the son of Agnella Yaffe, who was the scribe of Jung's Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And so he was steeped in it all his life. Unfortunately, he got cancer at a very young age, and he died at the age of 63 and in about 2003, if I recall correctly. But he had been a Jungian analyst in Berkeley for many years, and he was very close to Edward Edinger, and conducted the profound interview with Edward Edinger, which you can find on my website, archetypeinaction.com. I'll put the link of that. And what you need to do in order to find what I'm talking about is you click on any of the posts on that, and then you'll see on the right side of the page a bunch of choices. And one of the choices is Edinger, and just go in there and noodle around, and you will find what I'm talking about. And so here is the link to my website, archetypeinaction.com.
I think you just made a very, very astute comment that helps combat modern specificity, where we're so used to, here's the link, go right there, no passage, no initiation, no journey. When you said, and noodle around, I mean, noodling around is such an important sandbox thing to do, to serendipitously discover other things, make connections that aren't presented, and make connections where you might find other connections that are presented. And I think that noodling around is actually a very, very productive thing. People say, oh, you're wasting your time, get back to work. It's like, no, you need to noodle around to keep your work fresh.
Right. I'd just like to read My Hope for Confluence 23, because it kind of points to this. And as we plan for it, and I go to California next week. On the 3rd of April, I'll be going to California to plan for it. We constantly have this tug of war between the logos and the eros, and I'm resisting putting the rational and the logos into it, although I have forces among my fellow organizers who try to bring it in. And but in any case, obviously there's a place for both, and that's the balance we have to find. And we have some people with very logos histories, including mine, of course. But here, and I'll just put the link to this page so that you can see this. I'll put it in the chat here. Let's see. Well, no, not doing this right. There it goes. There it is in the chat for the Zoom. And let's see, where am I here? Anyway, I'll just read this to you, and then I'll put the link onto the YouTube chat. Skips hope for Confluence 23. From Confluence 23, we expect to expand our cultural innovation into new arenas with many new friends and participants. During our event, we will spin new golden threads and weave them together into an ever-increasing culture of artists and curious and committed individuals who are anxious to find a new way forward in our collective culture. There is no question in my mind that we will find new ways to bind ourselves together individually as organizers and as new friends and participants. Such a development cannot be rationally worked out as some sort of Frankenstein-like science project. It is only from our interactions before, during, and after the event that something new can emerge. What will we think about it in November 23 and thereafter? Okay. So it's our interactions, it's everything that we do that makes a new culture. And here we have 15 people live on this YouTube discussion right now. And that usually means that we have more than 100 people who have checked in during the 2 hours that we allot ourselves. And so I hope that many of you who are with us now will be able to join us in Mount Madonna Retreat Center in October. And that link I just put in there, confluence23.org, who, if you scroll down to my name, you can see what I wrote there. And let's see what else. Estelle says she likes sand painting. Alice says, reading the Red Book definitely stimulates the neurotic and psychotic. Well, maybe so. And I don't.
The neurotic, the psychotic, but also the neurons in the psyche.
Right. And I just remember the favorite that came out when I was in about the 8th grade, which was Mad Magazine, and Alfred E. Newman's comment, what me worry.
Oh, is it?
What me worry?
Oh.
2 questions. What me worry? It all crashes together and it becomes chaos, and then it comes back together and is reformed in some way. And we're seeing that in our own society. right now, and we're having a real-time experience of this whole thing that Jung was talking about, where somebody who was totally for the pleasure principle for himself has sort of got a lot of other people to think they could live his life, and that wasn't the case, of course, and that was their mistake. And now we're seeing rationality come back and start to rule again, and it's a process that goes on constantly everywhere in the world, and we just have to continue to remember that pale blue dot. We all live there, and it's up to us. Now, someone said,
I would put forth too, this is just my bent, but be mindful not to get hoaxed and convinced by too much rationality. Some things make way too much sense to be worth a damn, because the heart of the matter has been pounded out systematically. So be careful about living your life like your resume. It's not that rational. And I find that rationality by itself usually indicates adolescence or childhood, because it's still asking for permission, it's still explaining, it's still trying to prove, instead of stepping up to what is the substance that's generating my surface, instead of always being hooked on the rational surface. So as a thought. I think your video froze. I think you were about to read a comment. Your video froze.
myself to that.
That last piece that if you were reading a comment, that your video froze and the audio didn't come through.
Oh, okay. Well, someone had asked who's won the Water Bearer Award, and I have to see if I can get myself to that point. Wait a minute here. I need to be in another thing here. I can probably give you the link to that. Let's see. Yeah, here it is. Okay, so I'm going to give you the link, and you can see that. Okay, that's the link to the Water Bearer Awards. Can you hear me right now?
I can.
All right. Okay, so there are 7 in captivity, and of those 7, 5 have been publicly awarded. There are 2 more that are out there, which belong to one of our number. Will remain not anonymous, and I do know where one of them is going to go, but I since it hasn't been formally awarded as yet, I don't want to spoil his thunder. So I'll just leave it at that. But in any case, the Water Bearer is a series of 45, and so far 1 through 7 have been committed, and it is available to individuals for purchase from the website of Tim Holmes, and it is available to Jung societies and astrology societies to award to individuals as we go forward. I made a major contribution to the commission of this in both directly and indirectly. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to afford to sponsor any awards in the coming year. I hope to, but we'll have to see what the wheels of fortune do for me. But in any case, it is available. There are 45 in the series, and 7 of them are out in the universe, and it is available for awarding to individuals. So the first award was given to Colleen Kibert, which was my original thought for her now over 90 years of contributions to the Jungian oeuvre and to helping people, especially in her neck of the woods. So she's the sponsor and the host for Confluence 23, and I hope you all come and join us for that. It's going to be quite astounding. Okay, I'm not saying that you're going to necessarily learn any art, okay, per se. Okay, we're going to teach art, definitely. But the whole thing is a work of art in its own way. And I know that Jordan, who had intended to come to the first one, and had actually paid to come to the first one, was stopped by influx of COVID, I guess. Was that COVID, Jordan?
Well, I don't know. Since I had COVID back in 2020, January, February, before it was a thing, I kind of just felt I had that tickle in my throat, a sore throat. There was no light wheeze that I'd had before, but in the context of me bringing that to the group, if I was immune and having kind of some kind of reaction, the last thing I wanted to do is become a spreader. And so it was just in the interest of not potentially infecting anyone else, whether it was or wasn't. And so in the end, I just donated my conference fee to the cause to offset some administrative costs. But it just felt it was prudent to not, since, I work with the public. And so there was what am I going to do? Test every 5 minutes right up till I hop on the plane. And, I just didn't feel within a level of acceptable risk.
Right. But at the same time, I know you feel that you missed something.
Oh, no, that's definite. That's
right.
Definite. There was a dynamism and interaction of just the experiential piece that there would be no way to put. All I could say was, let's use the words from today. Poor words. If I said something, they would just be poor words. So yes, I did.
Right. Okay. So next week we will begin with chapter 11, which is called Resolution. And in the meantime, thank you all for being here.
Good to see you.
And we'll see you next week. And if you haven't joined our YouTube, our advanced reading group and would like to, you're more than welcome to join us. We meet every Wednesday. I'm going to put the registration for all events in the YouTube chat so that you have that again. But if you want to be in the advanced reading group, which meets at 5 p.m. every Wednesday to accommodate my own schedule. So that means it's It's 2 p.m. in the West, and when you can work out your time zone from that, you're certainly welcome to join us. And we have a lively discussion every week, and we're currently reading Eric Neumann's book, The Place of Creation, which Jordan gave me for Christmas a year and a half ago. And I'm finally forcing myself to read it thanks to this process. So anyway, take care, everyone, and stay safe. And I hope you get some time to digest what we've said today.